Let's open up the lecture notes. I realized I usually in some of my other classes I stream from my laptop, and I realized I forgot my charging cable and whatnot. But alas, let me pull my announcements up. We'll go to right there. Okay. All right. So let's keep this straightforward. So my apologies in advance. I know that we had some. I think Tanner mentioned that we had some technical hiccups with on our end with Handshake. Did he mention that during the lecture last time?
Yes.
Okay. So we set up an upload link for you all to upload your resumes on Blackboard. If for some reason you had any technical hiccups doing that, just let us know. I'm not going to get too worked up over, if it's a little late, given that, we had some issues on our end. I don't think it's right to sort of pass that on to you. But do try and get your resumes uploaded as soon as you can to Blackboard. Yes, sir.
I uploaded mine to Handshake. I didn't upload it.
Well, so what we said last week is that we were having a little issue on our end accessing the list. So we were asking everybody to go ahead and also upload it to Blackboard. Now, if you didn't do that, if you could relatively soon, that's fine. We're not going to worry about like any late penalties or anything like that as long as you do it. What's that?
I got a hard copy too.
That'll help. I mean, I'll take it afterwards.
Mine was visible last time though because I got comments on it.
But I'm talking about from our end.
Oh,
Yeah.
That's what I'm getting at.
And also next week, I have a test in my other class. I might not be able to.
Okay. All right. Let me say. Let me address that real quick. So we went through this weekend, and I think the attendance grades and whatnot are largely up to date on Blackboard. Let me say a couple things about that. So number one, I know that there might have been a couple of you that had an issue with the QR code. I'm going to pull it up again at the end of class to give everybody another chance to scan. So I'll make sure and do that near the end. If you're going to miss class for some reason or another, please do me a favor and email both myself and Professor Drown. Let us know. We're usually pretty easy to get along with, but if you let us know ahead of time, it does help out with logistics. In another one of my classes, I got an excused absence request for a student, and it was from January 10th. And I got it yesterday. That was a while ago. It's a lot easier to handle the attendance grades and whatnot as they come. But just like I said, we're pretty easy to get along with. If you're going to miss class and whatnot, like for example, if you've got a job interview or something, this is co-op. I'm gonna be okay with that. So yeah, everybody good? All right. Now we do have another assignment that we've started today that's going to be due on February 23rd, and it's because of some upcoming exercises in this class. Last time we talked about some professional concepts that are sort of important to you in the workplace, but we need to start talking about the process by which you will actually get a job, or get an internship, or get a co-op. And what that means is, we start off by polishing your resume, getting it professional and getting it ready to submit. And then what happens? You take that resume, you start applying for jobs, and then they pick you. Do they just give you the job? No. They engage in the next stage. What's the next stage? The interview, right? You're going to have interviews, right? We're actually going to force you through an interview experience in this class. We have mock interviews coming up relatively soon, around week 9. It's week 5 now, so it's not happening like today, but it's going to happen pretty soon. And so I want to talk about the interview process. Now, it's going to be a lot like the resumes. I'm going to give you my take on it, and Career Services is going to come in and give you their take on it, and then between the two, you can synthesize what works. But I want to share with you my experience, my advice for you, what I think goes well and what I think doesn't, and maybe also try and piece together what's happening in the modern age, because nowadays we have Teams, we have Zoom, we have all these tools that maybe were rarely used, and then this pandemic thing happened, and now they're not so rarely used. So with that, let me go ahead and jump into this play. Okay, let's talk about the interview process. And like I said, I'm going to give you sort of my advice, things that I think are important. Again, this isn't, don't take this as gospel. This is just the stuff that I've experienced that I think leads to success. Okay? So a couple things. One of the things that I think that you should take away from an attitude perspective. Let me stop for a second. How many of you have had an interview? Just curious. Okay. All right. Good. So most of you have been through an interview process at some phase or another. And to be clear, interviews for a job at Walmart or a convenience store or McDonald's are different than interviews for an engineering experience. It's a different experience. It's a different expectation. It's a different environment. So I want to talk to you a little bit about what's different. Now, I would argue that the stakes are a little bit higher, so there's a chance you're going to be nervous, right? We all know that, okay? So the first thing I would recognize mentally is that, and I want you to think of an interview as more of an equitable experience. When you're trying to get a job at McDonald's or Walmart or a convenience store or something like that, they just want to know if you're going to work for them, and if not, they're going to move on to the next applicant. There's a little bit more of an investment, I think, with some career level positions. So I want you to think of an interview as a place where not only are they trying to learn about you, but you are trying to learn about them. Okay, and so because you got to realize you all have some worth too. I want you to try and not be as nervous because you're trying to evaluate them. And that doesn't mean walk in and start grilling them, but it does mean that you should recognize, hey, I've got some worth. I need to know if this company's right for me. And take a little bit of that professional ownership of the situation. Again, be professional, be humble, but I think that that mindset will help maybe calm the nerves a little bit. You should be trying to get hired. Put your best effort forward on all fronts. Be yourself. Don't be who you think they want you to be. I don't think that goes well in interviews. Please turn your cell phone off. In my opinion, leave it in the car. Do not be the person in the interview where your phone goes off. That's not good. Okay, so I would just urge that right off the bat. Okay. When you meet somebody or when you walk into the room, I think it's good to repeat the person's name. I'd say when you're interacting with somebody, keep it formal first until they give you permission not to. Nice to meet you, Dr. Michelson. Call me Greg. Okay, then call them Greg. Okay, don't automatically assume that they're okay with that. Okay, treat them with respect first, and when they say it's fine to call them Steve or Barbara or Greg or whatever, then go ahead. Okay? Look people in the eyes. I think this is important. There's an old joke about engineers that introverted engineers stare at their shoes when they talk to somebody, and an extroverted engineer stares at the other person's shoes. That's a joke. Everybody get that. But the point is, try and project a little bit of that confidence. Look somebody in the eyes. Whenever you're asked a question, and to be clear, sometimes in an interview you are going to be asked some challenging questions. Sometimes they're simple. Sometimes they're really wanting to push you a little bit. I think it's okay to stop and pause and think about the answer a little bit. You don't need to just blurt out an answer right as they ask. Some of the most impressive interviews that I've been a part of have been when I ask a challenging question and they take a second. They think about it, and then they give a response. I'm not saying pause for a solid minute. That's going to get kind of awkward. But I think it's okay to take a second, think about what they said, and then answer. I think that's fine. Now, this is another one, and this is part of the reason for the second homework assignment. I think it's really important to know as much about the company as possible, and I'm going to give you an honest story. This actually happened. So, as a professor, one of the things that I have done, and I've done it quite a bit since my time here at Marshall, is serve on what are called search committees. So the university lets a position in some given department. And while there are folks in HR and payroll that focus on, the legal aspect, the paperwork aspect of hiring somebody, there's a list of 50 candidates candidates, they aren't as experienced in knowing who's a good engineer and who's not. So they will actually appoint what's called a search committee of a few, let's say, engineering professors that help sift through applicants to help find this is the right person that has the right area of expertise in this area. So I've been on the other side of the interviews table quite a bit. And we had a phone interview once, and I'm telling you, this happened. We went through a list of questions, and then our last question was, do you have any questions for us? And they said, so where's Marshall? PhD, mind. They asked where Marshall was. I was tempted to say, it doesn't really matter where it is, because you're not coming. I was tempted to say that, of course did not. But you don't want that to happen to you. Your second homework assignment, which I'm going to break it up a little bit, is going to force everybody in the room to prepare what are called 3 company profiles. And so you pick 3 different potential places that you would go to work. Maybe if you're a civil engineer, you pick the DOH, the Army Corps, a construction company, maybe mechanicals, you pick Toyota, or maybe not here. Maybe you want to go work at SpaceX or whatever. That's fine. But it's forcing you to do a little bit of research on, okay, if you want to get a job, who's the HR person that you need to contact? Where's the apply now? How much gross sales or gross revenue do they do in a given year? What do they do? What type of projects do they work on? It's forcing you to do a little bit of that basic research on a given company. And I think that's very, very important during the interview process, that you come in knowing a little bit about what they're doing, because it shows that you are invested in the opportunity as well. All right, here's another one. Have a written or a list of written questions. This is going to get kind of important as it starts getting real, because you're going to want to know, okay, what's the salary? What are the benefits? What are the insurance benefits? Do I get a company vehicle? Are you going to pay for training? Am I going to have to travel a lot? How much am I going to have to travel? Am I going to be traveling sporadically or all at once? Am I going to be working in the field or working in the office? I think it's okay to have those questions with you. It shows that you're invested and shows that you are thinking ahead. Here's a big one, and this happens to this day, and I'll admit it kind of bugs me, is contact your references ahead of time. So what'll typically happen if you're the person, if they're, okay, we want this person, they're going to go to their reference list and make the proverbial reference call. And if I didn't know that you put me down on a reference list, then I'm not going to know that the call was coming, And I swear I've had, and I'm going to make the name up, but I've had instances where somebody put me down as a reference and it was a common name, like a John Smith, and I'm like, who? I didn't want to say that, but that's kind of embarrassing if, you put me down as a reference and then they call me and I'm like, I don't remember. I've had a lot of students over the years, so let your references know in advance that the call is coming. They can prepare, get ready for the call, make sure that their schedule's open. But if you just put somebody down for a reference and not let them know, even if you know that the reference is going to be solid, you want to make sure that they're on their A game when they're giving you a reference. So make sure you let your references know in advance. Be early for the interview, and I mean early. I think you should plan to be there 20 or 30 minutes early. Have you ever had something really, really important happen or that you needed to be to and you got lost? Does that ever happen to you? You are not in the right mindset when you show up. You're freaking out, you're jittery, and now you're going to have a very, very important job interview. That's not the right mindset to be in, right? It's not. So I think you should be early. I don't be late. Be late for a job interview, you might as well not show up. Might as well just forget about it. One of the things about being early is I think it allows you to get lost once and not freak out. If possible, I'll try and scope out where it is. I mean, you might be sitting here thinking, come on, we got Google Maps, it'll tell us where we need to go. We don't need to worry about this. That's not the case. For example, there's a lot of times that engineering firms are just, in some commercial spec office building. You might be able to find the office building, but finding where the firm is in that building, scope it out. Make sure that you're not going to get lost. I think that's really important. It allows you not to be panicked for the interview. This is a big one. There are some questions that are common. I think you should practice some of those answers. And I think it's good to practice those out loud. if you've ever done any public speaking, which hopefully just about everybody in here has through Communications 103, you will find that you get better the more you practice it, okay? And I strongly believe that you should practice those questions out loud. Another thing that I think you should do for an interview is, and engineering and career position interviews tend to be half-day or day-long experiences. You'll meet with a bunch of people. They might take you out to lunch, give you a tour of the facilities, maybe take you to a job site. It's very, very common. You're going to meet a lot of people. You might have a lot of business cards at the end of the day. Send them a little email. Thank you for the time. Thank you for the experience. I'm really excited to hear back from you. It shows, again, that you're truly invested and that you care about the position. If you're not doing that, that's probably not a good thing. This isn't a big deal for positions in the area, but not everybody at Marshall University wants to be employed in the area. Some of you are going to want to travel to Dallas or Seattle or wherever, you know. If your firm that you're going through, or if they're not reimbursing you for a travel expense, I kind of think that's a red flag, because that means they're not doing right by their employees. That's pretty common. So the way that works is one of two ways that it typically works for interview experiences. Either you might book your travel and they'll reimburse you later, or they might book your travel. Like, for example, if it's a flight, they might fly you out there. You know, they'll pay for the flight. You just have to show up to the airport. I've had both instances happen. But if you have an employer that's just, we'll interview you, but you got to pay for it, that's probably not a good thing, okay? Before I just mow ahead any questions, anything that's popped up in your interview experiences, we're going to talk about some interview questions here in a bit, and talk about some good and bad responses and whatnot. So, but any questions? Phone interviewing, and I would argue that a lot of this now applies to phone interviews as well as Teams interviews or Zoom interviews. Those are becoming incredibly common. Nowadays, I'd argue for most positions, you're going to have a phone or a Teams, Zoom, Skype, whatever platform you want. You're going to have a virtual interview before you have an in-person interview. It's a lot easier to sift through candidates and whatnot. So let's talk about some things. I say wear your suit, but whatever professional attire that you need to wear, I think you need to wear it. Even for a phone interview, I know that might seem really crazy that you're on a phone interview and you could be in your PJs and bathrobe, but I kind of think that dressing formally gets you in a frame of mind and gets you in a mode of thinking that's really important for an interview. I mean, I don't know about you, but if I'm in a suit and tie versus in my, Spider-Man t-shirt and PJs, I'm not the same, There's Dr. Michelson and then there's Greg, When I'm on an interview, I want to be Dr. Michelson, You know what I mean? When I'm at home playing Mortal Kombat, that's Greg's fine. So, sit at a desk, dining room table. I would sit up, make sure you're sitting up straight. I tend to think that speakerphones are a bad idea. I usually, at least, for a while, I had not recommended using hands-free devices. Nowadays, I don't think that's too big of a deal. I think AirPods or Bluetooth have gotten a lot better. Personally, if you're doing a Teams interview or whatnot, if you're really interested in getting it professional, I don't think there's too much harm. Nowadays, podcast Bluetooth or podcast USB microphones are really cheap. I have one in my office that whenever somebody calls me through Teams, that's what I'm speaking through. Audio quality's perfect. It's one of those snowballs. I think it works very well. I don't think if you're ever on a phone interview, don't do this. I don't think that works very well. If you're going to speak on the phone, do this. One thing I think is a good idea during a phone or Skype interview is to have a copy of your resume with you. They might ask you questions about specific listings on your resume, and so having it with you, I think, is kind of important. And a big one these days: make sure your phone is charged. You do not want to be doing an interview on a 10% or a 5%, because what's going to happen? You're going to start to get the little ding that says that your battery's dying, and you're going to freak out. I mean, beyond dropping the call, you're going to be in the wrong mindset. So, no, don't do that. Any questions? Okay. All right. Formal in-person interviewing. Dress nice. We're talking, suit and tie, professional attire. Let me ask you a question. I'm curious about this. What color should you avoid? Anybody know what color you should avoid for interviews?
Probably red.
Red. Avoid red. I have a necktie that has bridges on it, and just laughing about this inside joke in structural analysis last semester. But that red was like, it's not like your sweater. It's kind of like a muted burgundy, and I think that's probably pushing. Muted colors I think are best, because you don't want to come in too aggressive and too bold. And so, like cherry red, don't do that. I say firm handshake. Having a good handshake is really important. Honestly, that might start to be important maybe in a couple years, with the pandemic and whatnot. Nowadays, the fist bump or the elbow bump might be a little bit more common in the workplace. So actually, maybe kind of be ready for that. Sit up straight. It is very common during an interview that they might offer you a beverage. Take it. Okay, take it. This is probably one of the biggest pieces of advice that I have for you in the interview setting, is to take a portfolio, a notepad with you. Because here's the thing. So you're sitting there in the chair and you're like, what are you doing with your arms? It's kind of weird, But if you have a portfolio and you have something to write with, it's actually kind of comfortable from an interview standpoint, because you're holding the notfolio with one hand and you're writing with the other. So it results in a little bit more of a natural sitting position, and so it doesn't look awkward. But I think you should have one anyways, because you should, one, have some copies of your resume, maybe copies of your reference list, have some questions, that you want to ask, and so I think it gives your hand something to do, and it results in a little bit less of an awkward scenario. Take notes during the interview. One thing to keep in mind, the interview is not over until you are in your car on the interstate, okay? And here's something I mean by that, okay? So you walk in, you meet the secretary or the admin, you're meeting the actual people who are interviewing you, the people in the office. Everybody in there is evaluating you, okay? Because what's happened is you're going to leave and they're going to go, what'd you think about Steve? They're going to ask everybody that, They're going to ask, the secretary, they're going to ask the equipment manager, the folks on the site, they're going to ask everybody. So make sure you're putting your best foot forward the entire time that you're there, okay? From the moment you walk into the door to the moment you're on the interstate, you're kind of being interviewed, okay? Any questions? All right, let's talk about some typical interview questions that you are going to get. Let's see. So, and I posted a lot of this on Blackboard. So, some of these questions. So, I'm going to pull up two different handouts. This first handout is just sort of like generic, typical interview questions. But the second one is actual questions that students at Marshall University have gotten through their interviews. So I might pose this to you here in a little bit. So, like, common one, tell me about yourself. I actually think that's one of the hardest questions. It's just that tell me about yourself statement. It's kind of hard. Like, I'm Greg.
You basically
I like bridges.
You just got to restate your cover letter, basically.
You're right, and talk about your motivations, your interests. Keeping it short. You don't want to ramble on. You know what I mean? This is one of those things where, like, having a well-rehearsed sort of packaged response is usually a good idea. I think another tough question, and it's kind of typical, maybe it's so typical that it's kind of old hat, is what's your biggest weakness? You know, it's one of those questions that I think you probably actually do need a real answer for. You don't, when somebody says my biggest weakness is I work too hard, I'm like, that's not an answer. That's just you telling me what you think I want to hear, you know? Like my answer, it's something I still work on to this day, is I'm not like, I let the email pile up, you know, and you know, it's usually a lot better to just respond, and then it starts piling up, and then there's emails I don't want to reply to, and it just it gets bad. And I have worked on strategies to improve that with myself, but it's one of those things. It's like I still, it's like I hate email. I'll be the first person to admit, but it's a necessary fact of life. I'm curious though, for the people in the room that have gone through interviews, have there been any interview questions that you've had that have either stumped you or memorable? Anything? I'm just curious. You know? Yes, sir.
Name a negative quality of yourself.
Name a negative quality of yourself. That's yeah. I mean, and that's kind of along the same thing as biggest weakness, but it's phrased a little differently. It's phrased a little more personally. You know, like there's one thing. You know, it's like your biggest weakness. I'm not good at basketball. You know, that's not really a that doesn't sting as much as like a negative quality about yourself. So yeah, that has a little bit more fire to it. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
I had one just randomly ask me what my dream car was out of nowhere.
Your dream car?
Yeah, it just caught me so off guard. I just had to
What was the job for, if you don't mind me asking? Like, was it anything related to engineering?
No, it's a salesman job. Just randomly.
Well, you know, one thing that's worth mentioning is that going into sales is not an entirely atypical field in engineering. I mean, you're not going to sell, you know, real estate, but it's not that uncommon for engineers to go into sales departments for equipment manufacturers and things like that, because we can speak the technical jargon that a general sales associate might not be able to. So that's not that uncommon. So, do you have one?
No.
Oh. Anybody else? Oh, there have to have been some pretty good ones. What about in general? Any interview experiences that stand out, or any advice that you would have that I haven't mentioned? I mean, I asked how many people have been on interviews, and there was a lot of people that raised their hands, so I know we all have stories.
Something I had another one when I was asked was, name a time when you were leading something and they're struggling, but you led through it.
Yeah, I mean, the struggle of you know, usually that they're interested in how you're going to handle challenges. You know, one of the things about the engineer versus the technician is that technicians are typically button pushers. You know, the order and sequence of those buttons may be complicated, but it's a sequence that you can learn. Engineers deal with open-ended problems. You know, the facts are, you're going to get out of here and get a job in engineering. You're going to be asked to design something we never taught you how to do. That's not the point. You know, we're not teaching you, you know, so that you can go out and regurgitate exactly what was on homework 2.8 for your career. We're providing you with the tools necessary so that you can solve problems that we didn't expose you to. You know, so there's a hidden layer in that we're not maybe putting out there directly every day in class. Now there's a couple other questions on here. Let's go to the questions that Marshall students have been asked. This is questions that we've actually had students ask or been asked. So, what did you do when you knew you couldn't meet a deadline, and how did you prioritize? You think that doesn't happen in the real world? That's not the case. Let's see. How do you know when your homework is complete and ready to be submitted? I'm asking. I'm curious. I can hear the answer being screamed at me right now in your eyes. Like, well, it depends on the professor.
Basically, like whenever, like, are you actually asking us that question? Are you just showing us the question?
These are questions that Marshall students have been asked. I'm just saying, these are the
Okay.
types of things that you might want to think about. Do you prefer to work by yourself or with a team? Right? That's actually pretty important. Let's see. Tell me a time when you were forced to use equipment that didn't work. Has it happened?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. That might happen in the real world, And so, again, these questions are intended for them to sort of get to know you, but also to see how you would respond to these sort of unknowns. Because guess what? That's that's what engineers do. Let's see. And by the way, I have a host of these questions. Some of them just generic questions, some of them questions that have been asked of Marshall students, and then some sort of like an older database of questions. I'm not going to make you do this. I generally think that you should go through them for your own benefit. I'm not saying stare at them for hours and hours, but these are questions that you could get asked. Like, for example, do you see yourself remaining on the engineering level or moving to management? There are folks in engineering that love design, and they love designing weird, quirky, complicated stuff, and it's their dream. And then there are people who would love to be the project manager overseeing millions of dollars of work. They are different animals, and they're both equally valuable. You might get asked which one you want to do. I can't answer that for you. Think about it. Every one of you is going to have a different answer to some of these questions. That doesn't mean they're wrong, but you ought to put yourself in that mindset. Okay. Any other questions, comments? I'm going to talk a little bit about the lunch aspect of this here in a bit. Okay. Now, before we get to that, I do want to talk about the exchange aspect of the interview, because there are usually avenues, usually at the end of the interview, where they ask you, do you have any questions for us? Again, as I said, this is an exchange. They're trying to see whether or not you're right for the company, but you're trying to see whether or not the company's right for you. And so it is okay to ask some questions at the end. I'm not saying have a laundry list, but there's some things that are going to be important to you and some things that aren't. What type of projects do you work on? What's the project budget? What do you see yourself doing for the next month, 6 months, 12 months, etc.? By the way, a lot of this stuff might already get answered in the interview, because at the very beginning, they might tell you a little bit about what they expect of you. They might tell you a little bit about the type of work that you're going to be doing, etc. So I'm not saying go through questions that they've already answered, but this is stuff that you might be interested in knowing. Let's see. Again, I mentioned travel. How much time are you going to be in the field versus in the office? Are you going to be traveling out of state, out of the country? Is it going to be sporadic, or is it going to be I'm going to work in the United States for 10 months and then spend 2 months in Azerbaijan or something? Are they going to give you a vehicle for traveling, a work truck, so on and so forth? What about the management style? Are you just going to have a single boss? You're going to work in teams? Who are you going to report to? Who you're going to be working with? Benefits. We're going to have a lecture later on in the semester that's going to talk about negotiation, and then we're also going to talk about, at least the plan is to actually talk about benefits. Let me tell you something. When I arrived at Marshall, they said, okay, I started in the fall semester, and they said something like, okay, by September 15th, you need to pick your benefits package, your retirement plan, your insurance. And they give me this insurance plan, and it's like this thick. They're like, pick the plan that works for you. I'm 27. I never had to do this one. What the hell is this? So, I'm hopefully going to try and get a lecture to talk about that stuff. You might not care about that stuff right now, but that stuff matters, okay? If you're, your retirement, your health insurance, all that stuff, that's really important. And so it's usually a very important decision that maybe at 22 or 23, you're just, whatever, but actually kind of matters. What's the salary? Are you, is there overtime, or is it just salary work? Are there bonuses sometimes, in engineering? If you finish the job early, maybe there's compensation accordingly. What type of computers are you going to get? Or what type of computational equipment, anything that you need? Are they going to provide necessary training for software that you didn't get exposed to, which tends to happen a lot in engineering arenas and whatnot? This is kind of the stuff you should be thinking about. And this is a very generic list, I should say. The facts are that every company is going to be different, and every experience is going to be different. For example, you're going to have a completely different conversation about structure and job requirements in the public sector than you are the private sector. Working for the government versus working for a consulting firm is night and day. I mean, a consulting firm, if you're not winning that bid at the end of the day, they might be shutting down the office. Whereas for the government, I don't think they're shutting down West Virginia tomorrow. You know what I mean? So there is a continuity at the state that you might not find at a consulting firm. Now, there is a trade-off, right? You may not make as much for the state, whereas for the consulting firm, you're making a little bit more. With salary comes stress, It's a pretty linear relationship there. Let's see. Some miscellaneous etiquette rules. I'd say when you're meeting somebody, always say your full name. I think it's, you kind of have to get into that habit. Like, I'm Greg Michelson, nice to meet you. Instead of just saying, I'm Greg. Who's Greg, Saying your full name gives yourself a distinction because you kind of want you to be remembered when they're thinking about picking positions or picking people to hire. When you're introduced to somebody, stand up. I think that should be a default. If somebody walks into the room and they're, meeting you, stand up and shake their hand, or elbow bump or fist bump, what have you. Don't get carried away with the thank yous. I have had conversations where I've heard somebody say thank you about 10 times and it gets a bit much. Maybe say it like twice. I think they get the point. Let's see. Lunch. Let's talk about lunch. Very commonly in career level interviews, they're going to take you out to lunch. Okay? What I think you need to get through your head is you're not there to eat. Okay? The lunch is merely a social lubricant to continue the interview. Okay? That's the truth. Okay? Now, a couple things. Do not order spaghetti. Don't do that.
That's a given.
What?
That's a given.
I've seen it happen. I've seen it happen.
Lasagna is also risky.
We're talking like some simple, chicken, or something, or if you're a vegetarian, maybe like a salad or something. Don't get carried away with it. Don't ask for a doggy bag or anything like that. Again, you're not there to eat. Don't worry about like finishing the meal or stuffing your face or anything like that. Just your purpose is to continue the interview. I would also kind of do your best to pay attention to what your other folks there at the table are ordering. If everybody else is ordering like the chicken, don't get the lobster. Kind of order on the same level with everybody else. I think that's some common sense, but you kind of want to do that. Thank your interviewer for the meal, but just once. Don't get carried away with it. It's funny, I've been on some interviews, so when we interview a faculty candidate, what we do is two for you. Okay, what we do is we actually meet them for breakfast, we take them out to lunch, and we also take them out to dinner. And it's funny, I've seen, like, in my opinion, by the time we're taking the candidate out to dinner, I genuinely want to let them know, okay, you can relax. And we've had candidates who, we bring them in, they eat, they make a research presentation, they make a teaching presentation, and they have been carted around across the board. By the time the end of the day is, they might not have had much to eat for lunch because they were continuing with the interview. And I can see it in their eyes. I'm like, look, if you're hungry, eat. It's okay. But the point I'm making is, again, the lunch, it's not for eating. It's just to continue with the interview. So eat, be polite, but the conversation is probably a little bit more important. All right. Any questions? I want to talk about this homework assignment real quick. Any questions? Okay.
Oh, I have one.
Yes.
You said take notes and everything whenever they're talking, but you also said make eye contact.
Yeah.
How do you do both?
That's a fair point. The best way I would answer that is to sort of gauge what's going on in the interview. I mean, if you walk in and they're literally just asking you questions, you're not going to have time to take notes, and they don't expect you to. But usually during an interview, there are phases where, one part of the interview is them sort of asking you questions and trying to get to know you and seeing what they can get out of you. But there are also folks that are going to be coming in and talking about the position, talking about the company, talking about the expectations. There's breaks, if you will, in what's being done. And I think, as long as you're paying attention, you can tell when they're asking you a question and when they're explaining some things about the company. So if they're giving you some information, they're not going to hold it against you if you're writing it down. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So there's a difference between the informational component and the interrogative component. That's a great point. Anybody else? This is good stuff. And we are going to have a mock interview where you're later on in the semester where you are going to be interviewed by a practicing engineer in the area. And it's not going to be for a given job, like they're just putting you through that interview process. But I would sort of take that process to heart so that because you're going to do things well, you're going to do things that you need to improve on, and they're doing this so that when you actually go through the interview that you've been through it before. Okay? Sound good? Okay. All right. Now, let me pull up this homework assignment because I kind of want to explain it and so that everybody understands. So this is not going to be due for a couple weeks. I don't want you to kind of get all worked up over it. But here, let me zoom in a little bit because that's probably a little hard to read. Okay. So what I want you to do is I want you to develop what I'm calling 3 potential employer profiles. And you're going to prepare these, like in a Word document or whatnot, and submit them to Blackboard. And what I want you to do is it's forcing you to do some basic biographical research on a given company. Okay, so I'm going to give you an example profile, and I want to preface this by saying this profile or this profile format might not work for every company. Let me give you a good example. Civil engineers in the room. I fully expect that a lot of you are going to put the West Virginia Division of Highways. At least some of you. They're not a company. They don't have like a gross revenue. You know what I mean? They don't manufacture products and then sell them. It's not like, Elon building Teslas and selling them to people. It doesn't work like that. They're just maintaining the roads and bridges. But what you can do is put some relevant statistics. Say, well, the state of West Virginia DOT, they maintain 7,000 bridges and X number of miles of road. They're separated by 10 managerial districts, and I want to go work in District 2, which is the Huntington office right down here. So some of these things like gross billings and so on, it may not work. But so the point is, I'm not trying to get micromanagerial on the format, like name, location, website. I think you need to put together the basic fundamental information that you need to help make a decision. So let's use Elon's Tesla company. Okay, so where are the locations that Tesla is or SpaceX is? Okay, what type of work do they do that you're interested in? Why do you want to go work for SpaceX? Where do you want to work? What type of work do they do that you're interested in? What's their history? If you wanted to apply for a job, what's the website? What type of salaries do you expect there? I'm wanting you to put together 3 profiles so that you can help make a decision. And I know that there's probably people in this room that, well, they already work at the Corps and they know when they're leaving, they're working at the Corps. I get that. But you don't know what's going to happen 5, 10 years from now. You don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. You might think you do, but you don't. So I want you to go through this process of researching about these particular companies. And by formalizing it, writing it down, I think it arms you with at least a base level of information that I think is necessary throughout an interview process. Knowing a little bit about the company, knowing a little bit about what they're about, what they do, etc., I think is incredibly important. And I'm giving you 2 weeks, and it's not exactly like it's a lot of work. This is an example profile that we got from a student in 2016, and I kind of think it's right on the money with the amount of information that you need. They don't need to be super long. And again, I'm not going to be micromanagerial about the number of categories. You can add categories if, delete some that you don't think are important and add some that you think that are. Again, if you wanted a job at some company, what do you think you need to know? Not just to want the job, but to help yourself make the decision as to whether or not you want it. Any questions? All right, so 2 items on logistics. If you have yet to upload your resume to Blackboard, I would really appreciate it if you could get that done by today or tomorrow. If you have any technical hiccups, let me know. One final thing, I'm going to stop the recording. I'm going to pull up the QR code again for anybody that wasn't able to scan it. That's all I have. We'll see you next week.
And just in like the previous weeks.
No. We'll take care of it.
What?